Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the UK-Japan trade deal, which looks like it's been agreed in principle, and to discuss just how beneficial it is and where it sits alongside Brexit in general. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, just having a little look at this. We'll throw this up. This is the government's press release, effectively, I suppose. Well, it is. It calls it a press release. UK and Japan agree historic free trade agreement. Now, I'm going to go over some of the main points of this. Of course, bear in mind that 2020 was supposed to be bringing us a Japan trade deal, a US trade deal, and an EU trade deal as well. And those are the ones we'll be looking at. As it happens, the EU trade deal is not officially not going to happen, but it is not going to happen. The US trade deal is officially not going to happen anytime soon. And if we continue with Boris Johnson's attempts at breaking treaties, is not going to happen at all, no matter who wins the presidential election. But Japan, so we have agreed this in principle. Now, it is an agreement in principle, but there's no reason to believe that it's not actually going to be ratified. So, this is a trade deal that we're going to have in place. Now, in terms of the details about it, what you can see from the press release is I'm going to go through bits and pieces. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But first of all, it says the UK has secured a free trade agreement with Japan, which is the UK's first major trade deal as an independent trading nation and will increase trade with Japan by an estimated £15.2 billion. But there's no qualifier for that. What do they mean? Over what period of time? There is something a bit further down. Now it says the UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement was agreed in principle by Liz Truss and Japan's Foreign Minister as well on a video call this morning, as in yesterday morning from the point of view which you're doing this, but it is this morning from my point of view recording this. It says the deal is tailored to the UK economy. Now, what's really important to note, to be fair, is this deal going to be better than the EU deal? That's what a lot of people are going to say. The deal itself has not been published. It's been agreed in principle. We don't get to see the details of it yet. That will have to come later. So we're probably talking a little bit of time before I can get my hands on it. And of course, I'm not going to do a video just when I get my hands on it. I'm going to want to see what some business leaders and economists have to say about it as well. However, the arguments are as follows. So when we do see it, we will compare it with the EU-Japan trade deal. The bump in here is trying to suggest that it is better than that in a number of areas. Now, again, this is where you talk about net effect. Is it better in some areas and worse in others? What's the overall thing? We can come to that as well. But what Brexiteers will argue, and fair enough, although it's not actually working here, is that, well, the idea of leaving the EU to strike our own trade deals is not to get better trade deals from an objective point of view. No, that's not the point. It's to get better trade deals for us personally, because when the EU negotiate trade deals, they are negotiating trade deals that are beneficial to all member states. And there's a lot of member states now. There's over 24. And that means they're not always focusing on what is best for each individual member state. It's just each member state gets something better. But if you can do it for yourself, you only need to focus on the services and commodities that are important to you. So is that what happens here? Well, what we need is some figures, because that, in principle, that argument, there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly true that the UK negotiating with Japan, it means we can focus on the trade in goods and services that are important to the UK and to Japan, not the UK and France and Germany and Italy and Spain and Greece and so on and so on. Fine. If it is even if it's not an objectively better deal than the EU deal, but if it is a better deal for us, then the government's appraisal should show that it will provide a significant boost to our GDP. So that's where we want to know. How much better is it? And we can see a little figure here. So first of all, it says UK businesses will benefit from tariff-free trade on 99% of exports to Japan. So we still want to know what is the 1% that it's not, because which businesses will that affect? And is that, better or worse than the status quo? But then it says here, government analysis, so their own figures, shows that a deal with Japan will deliver a £1.5 billion boost to the UK economy. Now, we'll get to the next bit in a minute about workers' wages. So 1.5 billion boost to the UK economy. So that's to GDP is what they're saying. Now, when you work that out, obviously using last year's figures for GDP, it's the most up to date. Also, even if 2020 were over, we wouldn't use 2020's figures because GDP has crashed through and all. But based on last year's, and that's what this will be based on because it is the most up to date, that is a boost of 0.07%. So there's a couple of things about that. So first of all, you go, well, it is a boost, isn't it, Phil? It is positive. Yes, it is. But bearing in mind the way these figures are worked out. So you're anticipating it. You won't be able to say how much of a boost to GDP it is until we're able to see. So this is going to be ratified by the end of the year. So what we need to see, to be able to see the actual benefit, we need to be able to look at 2021's figures. Well, 2021 hasn't even started yet. We're not going to get 2021's figures until really close to 2023. So there's going to be some delay in that. So obviously these are projections. Fine, that's fair enough. But where there'll be a little bit of an issue here is, first of all, a lot of our Japanese trade is based upon also having a trade agreement with the EU. So will they be taking into account any trade that would be lost as a result of us not having a free trade agreement with the EU, for example? Because it looks at the moment like we're not going to get a free trade agreement with the EU. So that could change the figure there. I am quite sure, because this figure will have been calculated before we even know how we're going to end the transition period with the EU, it will be based on a free trade agreement with the EU. Because I'll be honest, if I were working these things out, and I'm not dishonest, as a politician, I was asking for these figures to be worked out, I would say base it on a free trade agreement with the EU. They'd be stupid not to. Stupid not to. Because the ambition has to be to get a free trade agreement with the EU. So why would you base it on anything else? The other thing is, in reality, the calculation, when it was worked out properly, will not have been 0.07% boost. It will have been a range. A reasonable range, obviously, not trying to account for weird situations happening like global pandemics, but it'll be a reasonable rate, but it will be a range. Does this figure represent the midpoint of that range, the upper end of that range? It certainly won't represent the lower end of that range. What I'm basically saying is 0.07% is, even to the nearest 0.5%, zero. It is as near as damn it zero. This trade deal was also arranged very hastily. It was very little discussion over it. The chances are that this trade deal, and we cannot know until we get the details, is just a carryover agreement. It's essentially what we already have, with maybe a few little tweaks. And the government's own analysis is saying it is also not really any different to what we already had with the EU as well. So you don't get to really bill it as a great trade deal, because it's not. A 0.07% boost to GDP is basically, this is essentially the same as we've already got. And also bear in mind there'll be certain assumptions made, like I say. If some of those are not true, like, for example, getting a free trade agreement with the EU, in reality, this trade deal actually would represent a net negative. But at the moment, we'll go with the plus 0.07%. So let's now bring other figures into it. Because the government has already carried out analyses on its preferred US free trade agreement. So it felt that that would give us a 0.1% boost, which is basically the same as the Japanese trade deal. But of course, a US trade deal isn't going to happen this year. And given the way we've been behaving this last week, is not going to happen at all until we behave ourselves rather better. So then there's the EU as well. So according to the government's own analysis, getting a free trade agreement with the EU would mean a net loss to GDP of, let me get the figure, 4.9%. There we go. 4.9%. That is the net loss. Because even a free trade agreement, of course, is not as good as remaining in the customs union single market, and even that is not as good as remaining as a full member of the EU. So on the sliding scale, full trade agreement, which sounds wonderful. It sounds like it's all the bells and whistles. It's not. It's just much better than no agreement. Even that means a net reduction of 4.9%. So let us imagine that the government had achieved all of its objectives this year. So it got a free trade agreement with the EU, the United States and Japan. That would represent a net loss to our GDP of 4.73%. And that is the government achieving all of its Brexit ambitions. All of its Brexit ambitions. 4.73% down on the deal. That's the height of their ambition. So no one really gets to talk about a GDP boost with this trade deal. It is a good deal, don't get me wrong. There are companies that export to Japan that, if we hadn't got this deal, would be in very severe trouble. So from the point of view of those individual businesses, of course this is good. From the point of view of the country, it is still it's better than having not got the deal. But in terms of the holistic view, and then you consider that in reality, the way the government have actually engineered things in the last week, we are stunningly unlikely to get a free trade agreement with the EU. Now, the government's own figures say that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, that will cost our GDP 7.6%, not 4.9%, 7.6%. So in reality, and because we're not getting the US trade deal either, we don't get to balance that. So the reality is that for all the bonhomie over this deal, and again, not knocking this deal, the reality is that at the end of this year, as a result of Boris Johnson's government's negotiations, we will be taking a hit to our GDP, not counting COVID or anything like that, just from, in terms of trade agreements, we'll be taking a knock of 7.53% below where we are this year. So that is all there is to it. I will just pick on one little thing because I did say I would at the end. So where it says, shows that a deal with Japan will deliver a 1.5 billion boost to the UK economy. And then it says, and increase UK workers' wages by 800 million in the long run. In the long run, what's the long run then? So obviously, I would think short term would be over the next year. Okay, it's got to build up, fine. The long run, when you sort of look at these things, tends to mean at least 10 years. So they're looking at this happening in a period of at least 10 years, at which point you then start to think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, you're now trying to predict something that's, because even that represents £800 million extra across the whole country is quite small. You're trying to predict something that precise in 10 years' time when there's all sorts of, we don't know where we're going to be in terms of trade agreements with other countries, where our GDP is going to be, anything to do with the economy. So what we'd really want to see is, okay, there is no issue, by the way, with having a long-term analysis, even though you know you're going to have to keep updating it. But what's the short-term analysis? That's what we want to know. And what's the medium-term analysis, which is over the next few years leading up to the next general election? But like I said, by the time the next general election comes, we won't really need to rely too much on projections because we'll have several years of actual data to look at as well. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.